Okay, so I broke out the 16 teams that we have for the Birmingham Major into 5 groups. We have the front runners, and maybe, you know what? How about we do this? How about we do one of these? What if I tilt my camera here a little bit? Is this going to work? Beautiful. And then maybe I'll overlay like the teams and whatnot right here. How's that? So we have 5 groups. We have the front runners, or maybe I won't. Future Bel Air, it's your call, man. I believe in you. Team of one over here. Front runners, the dark horses, the underdogs, the competitors, and the happy to be here teams. Let's start at the bottom, and we'll work our way up. How about that? So happy to be here. I have 3 teams. FUT. I don't know if it's foot, but this is our SSA VK Sailing roster. Just happy to be here, right? There's all of the drama that's going on with SSA and how we feel about the teams and taking spots. We talked about this briefly on the Shiftcast. Shameless plug. Shiftcast Season 2 is back, and I am very fortunate to be a part of it. But we talked about it on Shiftcast Episode 1. I'd go check that out. In short, I'm just going to defer to the people who this is impacting directly. I think of people like Graybeard, who does a ton of great stuff over in SSA, and he's been outspoken about not being a huge proponent of this structure that we have currently. I don't have too much to say about them. I've watched combined probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 2 series, whatever that adds up to, of this roster so far this season. Don't have too much to say. They might be my lowest ranked team at the event just based on the region they're coming from, what we anticipate from SSA as an overall region. We of course have gotten a lot of exposure to a team like Limitless in the past, who are typically around the bottom of our 16 competitors here. And so I'm going to have FUT there, although they could get a win, sneak one off of these rosters. Next, I have Luminosity in the happy to be here tier. Sphinx is super exciting. He might come up in the next segment, guys, of players to watch from each team. Alongside Sosa and Catalysm, Sosa making his RLCS LAN debut, proudly repping Canada, and he's a really strong offensive player. I've talked about him in videos in the past, like years ago. I don't think I ever made one for Sosa directly, but just making comments here and there about like you just catch him in some of these games, and if you didn't know any better, you'd be like, man, he's really really good, especially on the offensive end. When I think of Sosa, I think of plays where he is catching on his own backboard and then can just take it end to end in transition with a flip reset. A lot of speed and momentum creating for his teammates, things like that. He's been a steadying but dynamic player for this Luminosity roster. And of course, Catalysm, longtime European gatekeeper on several different rosters. Had a little cup of tea as a coach in the middle there, and now he's made his way over here to bring that kind of veteran steadying force, who's been to a LAN himself. What was that, 2 seasons ago? Winter Major with Evil Geniuses, Rizex and Ivan. They did not have their coach in tow, who was Moomin at the time, but they ended up making a good run. So Catalysm brings that experience. Sphinx, of course, has been there as well. Excited to watch some Luminosity. Also excited to watch Healthy Chiefs, a team that ended up making it out of the brawl that was OCE this split. They end up coming out on top here to join Wildcard as the 2 representatives, beating out teams like TSM, Scrims World, Power, Ground Zero, Pups. And, this Chiefs team, like, Hunter has really excited me when I've seen him on LAN. We, of course, think about the Esports World Cup, where him and Kaka played with Jorias. I just think as a facilitator, Hunter's great. As a defense into offense kind of player, a strong player within the half-court set there. And then being able to facilitate to his teammates who might catch a boost in the corner and then take off. He's really good at that. and just being like a grounding force for a team alongside two guys who could pop off. Fiber is definitely one of those where he's kind of like a free play demon kind of player. I know he just posted a clip the other day getting a pretty wild corner wall redirect into his own goal off like a midfield pop and just a chase and hit. And there's power along with the whole thing. Him and Pioneers, of course, pulled off a huge upset at the World Championship last season, able to eliminate Gen G, which was the Jack Chronic First Killer roster. Big win for them, right? And alongside them is Raziers, who's been a player who has been strong and within that kind of top 8, top 6 to top 9, top 10-ish range in Europe for quite some time. Coming over here, he seemed like he was poised to have a massive season here in OCE. Do you remember he actually for half a second, I think, was going to go play in APAC? And then he said, you know what, I don't want to go play in APAC. I think I'm going to come home, and then ended up in OCE. Maybe I'm making that up, but I think that's the path that Raziers took this offseason. And, a really strong 1v1 player consistently. He's a player who gives them some street cred here coming into this tournament that they might not have otherwise. Just some legitimacy that comes along with having a player of his caliber within the world standing. Tier 2, competitors. 3 teams here as well. I have Team Secret, Wildcard, and Gen G. Sorry, guys. Team Secret, Mata and KV1 have made it to quite a few lands already in their young careers. I think they're actually almost the same age. Mata came in a little bit later than you would assume, and KV1 came in earlier than you would assume. KV1's only 18, and I think Mata's the same age if I recall correctly. But 2 guys who have land experience around one of the newbies in Swift here, who is, I've talked about him several times this season. I think one of the most exciting watches in the RLCS right now. Just his ability to create, his understanding of being a move or two ahead of the game that's unfolding on the pitch. Just being able to find scoring and passing angles that you might not see, getting to balls to cut things off in the midfield in a way that you wouldn't really assume was reachable or gettable. And they've run into the Fury of Buzzsaw many times over. They played him close at the start of the season, but it kind of got further and further away as the season went on. And, coming in here, like KV1, of course, has made a top 4 previously when he was playing on an old Team Secret roster that overtook a version 1 team. But I struggled to put this team higher than this competitor spot. But again, like, I think from here on out, from competitors up, any of these teams could make it a top 8. I don't think that that's unrealistic. A team that is still searching for their first top 8 after many bites at the apple is the second team in this competitors category. That is Wildcard. They had a shaky open 2, and they had to fight for their lives to make it here. But we've been doing the top 20 rankings all season so far with Martian Turtle, Captain Dolphin, and Myth. You can find that over on Martian's channel. We've been keeping those aligned, and I've had OCE really low all season just because this is the best team in OCE, and they have struggled to overcome that top 8. They've tried to get there. They make it around 5 all the time, but they just can't quite get over that hump just yet. And maybe this is the time they do it. Taurus and Fever aren't getting any younger. The team is aging, as we just saw their head coach Gemma get married. Congratulations, Gemma, on taking that big life step. It's always awesome to see. But my point is that, how many better opportunities are you going to get than this? I just think that the sun will set on this team eventually. Banana Head was one of the best scorers in the world last season, and had some excellent land events in his own right. If not now, then when? I guess is kind of the question here for wild card. And Jin G, who is the exact opposite, or they also have a short little phrase, "Why not us?" as opposed to "If not when." Um, the run was awesome, and the fact that they were able to overcome ultimates not only taught me a lot about their poise as a team and vindication for this roster, it also taught me something about ultimates, and we're going to talk about them, of course, in a little bit here. But I their run was super impressive, and um, I just think I was doing this exercise because I rewatched the matchup yesterday. Jin G posted their comms video for that grand finals. And as I was watching, I was doing the exercise in my head of if I had to rank these 6 players, how would I do it? And honestly, I think I'd pick all 3 Ultimates players before I would get to a Gen G player. I think Cheese is probably the top talent on that roster, and I think if I were trying to in a vacuum like think of their overall talent, I think I probably have all of the Ultimates players above him at this point in time. Building a team isn't the same. I'd probably pick Cheese a little earlier than some of our Ultimates players, but that's all just personal preference or whatever. But all of this to say, I ended up talking about Ultimates when we're not even there yet. For Gen G, the run was incredible, and the value of teamwork and self belief and not going down without a fight and having the chip on your shoulder are all very real, and they're all certainly positives. I think Reynolds is an excellent on the pitch leader, and Rogreg does a great job off as well, getting these guys in order. Um, we just haven't we've seen a couple of times of these players being at lands, and it just hasn't worked out well. Of course, FIFA E and the land that we had last season for the RLCS. So despite their run and their cohesion and their coming together and how great the story is, I just think that this is where they are based on the quality of the other teams that we have in the world right now. This is this is a really stacked major that we're coming up against. And to shine a little more light on that, our next 3 teams, the underdogs here, GK, Complexity, and Dignitas. I think this is where you kind of draw the line of teams that have a realistic chance of winning this whole thing. I just it could happen, right? Especially for GK and Dignitas, I feel like they're probably the stronger cases here. Let's just talk Complexity real quick just to get them out of the way because they don't fall into this bucket. I think they're the weakest of these 3 underdog teams here. They've just struggled all season in big moments. They've, got reversed from 3-1s a couple of times and have looked shaky in some of these late series here. I just don't think that they've shown the poise and the togetherness to have a compelling argument to win this tournament or even make a top 4. Honestly, that would be kind of surprising to me. I feel like their floor is really high, but their ceiling is a little lower than some of the other teams that we're going to talk about here. And Dignitas, you could talk me into it, and I could talk myself into it. To be honest with you, Jack, of course, has won a LAN here pretty recently, and if it depends on what shade we're getting of Joria's, I think is important. Stizzy is finding himself in his own right, and I think that he's a player to watch for sure. But I think the X factor as to whether or not they are a legitimate threat or just a good team here is Jorius, who of course, there's the curse that he's overcome of the top 8s. I don't want to linger on that too much because who knows if that's even really real. It um, could be based on the situation around you as well, whether it be teams or whatever, who you end up matching up against in those top 8s. But Jorius in some series, I think about when they sank Vitality in what was that Open 2, where he was unbelievable. It's seared into my brain the shot that he hit on Neo Tokyo to break the scoring deadlock in that game 6 and ended up beating Vitality. He comes off the back wall, off the ceiling with a drop down shot with, you know, accuracy and power into the back of the net. Just unbelievable stuff. There's that version of Jorias, and then there's also a version of him where he looks a little bit shaky. So that volatility and the lack of just, you know, just talent. Like Stizzy's a great up and coming player. He's definitely rated lower than some of the strong young players on the teams that we have to come up here. And yeah, I don't really have a good reason for it outside of just looking at the rest of the teams on the radar here. And just, you know, there's the classic test of like, if you close your eyes, can you see this team hoisting a trophy? I struggle with that exercise when we're talking about Dignitas. GK is a team that seems a pinch more likely just because of how dominant the run was. We talked about Gen G's run. The GK one was way more impressive to me, not only because of the teams that they beat in the region they did it, but the way in which they beat these teams. I mean, being able to overcome Ultimates in a grand finals is very impressive, but sweeping Carmine Corps, who are still head and shoulders the best team in the world, in my opinion, is just unbelievable. Going 12-0 in that playoff run. Shouldn't have doubted it, but just based on the context that we had coming in, it seemed very unlikely that GK would do it. You can never count out Joyo at these lands. You just can't do it. He's had too many events where he has looked awesome. He's had some duds that you could kind of forget about, but he's had too many over the course of his career to be ruled out. Archie, like Nick had put out a video on his YouTube channel talking about the leadership that Archie brought to the table. That is awesome to hear because that's really kind of been a fear of mine in the past. And that from the outside looking in, maturation that Archie is going through to kind of lead this team and be vocal about what kickoffs they're going for and just being able to keep this team aligned and putting out really, really solid Rocket League is awesome to see. I think they bring a X factor that very few other teams can here. Not only like silly things like Oli playing on the Batmobile, but I rewatched that Carmine Corps series, and what they were doing a lot was just playing really unorthodox is a great word, Rocket League, where if a player dove at a ball to try and contest in the midfield, he would keep going, steal the back corner boost, and then rotate back into the play with momentum and try and catch backside demos. And in doing that, you run the risk of exposing yourself on the defensive end. Excuse me, you're playing at a deficit, right? But if you had the ability to win a lot of those 2v3 situations that might be put out, and then you can catch a backside demo, that ability in transition to score and really scramble the other team's communication and make them uneasy at all points, second guess their touches, rush their touches. If GK can do that and find that rhythm, they're definitely the strongest underdog here and deserve to be considered to move up into our second to last tier, which is our dark horses. 3 more teams for you: Twisted Minds, the Ultimates, and Furia. Is it crazy to say that Twisted Minds is probably the strongest of these 3 teams? I know that Atomic doesn't have a great track record. That Oli and Dorito G1 team got smacked when they were here before. But I just am a Rise LAN truther. Played more LAN games than any player in RLCS history, and I just don't think that he's afraid of the moment or is going to back down. I think that he's coming in here with a Mina team that are an underdog who have a chip on their shoulder is actually going to make Rise even more potent of a threat here. He looks fluid. He looks fast. I've watched quite a few replays of Twisted Minds getting ready here, and his abilities, especially on the offensive end, have not gone down. He, much like Itachi, is a great facilitator for his teammates, giving them space, the ability to understand the pace of play of the game, slow down when needed, speed up when the defense is kind of flat-footed in their own box. Rise is excellent at doing that, and we haven't even talked about Nupo yet, who is one of the most dynamic offensive strikers that we have. really, really high up there last season with a player like Banana Head and goals per game. And of course, they're in emerging regions, so it's kind of tough to know how to compare them to the North American and European top talent. But Nupo, if you watch him consistently, is doing things where it's incredible to watch. You wouldn't have even really considered it. I would say him, Drawley, and Swift are probably three of the most exciting offensive players in the world through one split. And I just think this team are coming in knowing that there's not the pressure on them that is probably on the six other teams that we're about to talk about here. And I think that lack of pressure, like again, that was a big buzzword for me from the first split here. Seeing how pressure was a factor rather, and kind of manifested in positive and negative ways for teams who were on the different sides of it. I mean, Genji and Ultimates, right? Like the pressure of Ultimates being able to cement themselves as a real team in North America heading into Birmingham, win a grand finals, LJ get his first regional win. They get right up against the precipice 3-1 and end up falling short. And on the other end of that stick, Genji had essentially no pressure because they were down 3-1 against a team that everybody perceives as better than them, and furthermore, they had the second life going up against SSG in the tiebreaker. So the lack of pressure that Twisted Minds feel coming in here, I think is a positive for them and puts them into the dark horse conversation for me. Another team in Furia who I think there's a little more pressure. You know, they dominated South America in a very real way. They look even better than last season. Statistically, they are more even than they were last year. Jorfinho has picked it up as a striker, and also just being a more cohesive part of the offense. His goal participation was really low last season, which was rough to see because it was a transition for him, right? That's not what he was asked to do on crew with Brad and Drops. He was kind of the anchor of that team offensively. And Furia asked him to fill a much different role, and they're kind of turning the corner and have massaged that into a way that makes more sense and spreads the love a little more effectively there. Yan and Lost have been here a lot, right? Especially as a duo. And I was thinking about this team last night as I was going through trying to do this ranking exercise. What separates a team like Furia from a team like Falcons, for example? And I think for me, it's that fear that the other team strikes in you. I was listening to a podcast about the NBA from last playoffs, just to kind of get myself before the playoffs happen, just to get myself into the headspace of like, what are some of the things that can be useful from thinking about that high level competition that might translate to something like a major. And they were talking about the Denver Nuggets as a team that kind of strikes fear into the other team that they're going up against, especially with a player like Nikola Jokic, or a team like the Lakers, where despite how good they might have been during the regular season, they still had LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and that's kind of a scary duo to go up against. A team like Falcons last season were able to impose their will on teams in such a real way in a lot of the matchups that they were in these late major situations, that I think that they still have that element of fear where on the other side you're like, oh my God, it's the Twins in TRK. You know? Like if you are Carmine Core, you're like, all right, like this is real, there is a legit high percentage chance that this team could not only beat us, but if you ran this matchup in a simulation 100 times, and some of them will run us over in a real way. And I just think if Carmine Corsi's Furia on the other side of the pitch, it's easier. It's the mental exercise of getting over the fear of the other team on the other side of the pitch is quicker than if it's Falcons. And that's kind of where I land on Furia. Like they're really good. if you ran this 100 times, I could see them winning a couple of these. You know, it all depends on how the bracket breaks. I think if they catch Vitality, we of course have the rivalry that was built between Vitality and Furia last season. Of course, the pieces are a lot different because Zen is the only surviving member of that rivalry from the European side. But I could see them uh, beating Vitality in a way that I could not see them beating Carmine Core, NRG, or Falcons on a regular basis. Um, so if it breaks where, like, let's just say um, they find complexity in a top 8, and then their top 4 is against Vitality, and then they make a grand finals. Like, that's real. I could see something like that kind of breaking out in some kind of way like that. But um, yeah, I think they are rightly here. And the same with a team like Ultimates, where, like, we talked about them a little bit earlier with Gen G and that matchup. I think that is like that is not a good mark. This is not a good badge to wear coming into Birmingham here. If you could win that, not only do you give yourself more legitimacy against the field, but also to yourselves. And to get to the grand finals and not be able to do that, LJ has been unable to do that. Chronic had a really bad series, especially in that game 7. He essentially gifted the tie to Gen G with a minute left, right? Where Magic Bear, or no, actually it was Reddles who put one midfield, and Cheese hooks through and just puts like a redirect from the midfield on target with so much power that Chronic tries to kind of catch and go to his backboard, but ends up just leaving the ball floating right in front of his own net. And Magic Bear puts it away. And then in the overtime, Magic Bear gets a huge clear out of his own corner. It skies over LJ, who can't read it in the midfield. And those two end up clamoring for a corner boost that ends up getting won by Magic Bear. And now LJ is boostless. And with First Killer bobbling a strike from Reddles in First Killer's own left corner, he bobbles that, then tries to get a panicked read to it, and that allows Cheese to squash one middle for Magic Bear, and then that play wraps up with LJ being boostless from his own corner, unable to make a play, and that's how they lose the whole thing. Um, LJ having that ball sky over the top of him, First Killer with the weird read, and then Chronic with a minute left during the regulation time where they were leading. I just think for a team that should not lose to Genji in that moment, the win over NRG is huge. And NRG had a weird had a weird open 3, especially with the fact that they were boot camping. To not look very dominant at all is not awesome to see. But yeah, Ultimates, I did not feel good about them before Open 3, and I do not feel better about them afterwards. And I guess let's transition now into our front runners, the only group with 4 teams. And let's start with NRG. Like, people are not going to want to hear this, but, like, they've shown some volatility here. We were just talking about the Open 3. The fact that they boot camp for that and did not look like one of the best teams in the world. Let's say you missed all of this season and only caught Open 3. You'd be like, man, NRG have really taken a step back. I am not going to overreact to one event, though. They are still certainly front runners. You could talk about them anywhere from second to fourth, in my opinion. I think, honestly, I probably have them third here. Probably KC, Vitality, NRG, Falcons. And don't freak out. Let me tell you about them before you say, oh my God, you have Vitality second. But NRG have looked like the best team in North America this season, who is second strongest region in the world. They, of course, made a grand finals in the World Championships last season with this exact same roster. I think Daniel has a legitimate claim to have looked like the best player in the world so far this season. We did on the Shiftcast MVP ballots for the 5 players that we wanted to spotlight. Daniel was one of mine. I think he's come back with a vengeance. This team is not playing a lot of ranked gameplay, and my initial read on that was why, But then I took a step back and thought that actually could be a better, healthier place mentally for a team who have already been there and done that. Like, they know that they have gotten to this point. I mean, they won a major last season. I should have mentioned that as well. So they definitely deserve to be here. And open three, poor taste in my mouth. But again, not going to overreact to that too much in the same way that I feel about a lot of these teams. Falcons, let's get them off the board as well. They won the FIFA E tournament. Congratulations. It was a home matchup, and it was against a lot of teams that aren't even actual rosters. So a little bit of a asterisk on that one. But again, like looking at last season, I felt like they showed the highest peak of any team in the world. There were some series where I would walk away and just be like, that team is unbeatable. The way that they are able to apply pressure and keep up a pace that seems untenable for the other team, able to find each other in ways that seemed at times clairvoyant. Of course, there's the twinergy that comes along with that, but just they hit this mark where it was just like, how can you possibly stop this team? They were their own worst enemy, showing different shades of themselves, very Jekyll and Hyde at some of the big moments last season, where they would absolutely dominate in the semifinals and then look much weaker, like TRK is playing with a little bit of kryptonite in his controller or whatever that's kind of permeating to his teammates. But again, like, they deserve to be front runners. And I think that we would, as a community, speaking for all of us, just like generally speaking, if you took the pulse of the entire RLCS fandom, I think we'd be higher on them if it weren't for them, of course, losing that Twisted Minds Grand Finals and Open 2, especially with Rise on 120 ping. I digress. It kind of felt like they thought they already had it in the bag, and they let off the gas a little earlier than they should have to allow Twisted Minds to get back into that one. Maybe again talking about that pressure as a key buzzword for this season. But I think Furia think that they deserve to be up at this spot, and they do. And maybe they repeat as LAN champions, having won that FIFA E like we talked about. Vitality. Following the theme of not overreacting to results, they've got run over by Carmine Core a couple of times here. The loss to Dignitas is a bummer. They've had to be a little more competitive with some of the teams below them than you might anticipate, given the talent on this roster. I think that is us reacting in the negative, in a negative way, as opposed to looking at and respecting the players on this team. Exotic and Monkey Moon just won a world championship, for crying out loud. And Zen was considered the best player in the world last year. We talk about this team like they've been playing like gentlemates. They have looked awesome in a lot of moments, a lot of series throughout this first split. And I don't really understand why everybody is so down on them. Like, there was even an Open 2, Monkey Moon was playing terribly, and they still made a pretty deep run. Of course, they ended up losing to Dignitas there, but like, for a team that, and again, I said I've been watching a lot of Zen footage. I'm working on kind of a longer form piece for Zen, so I've been watching a lot of footage from that team. And what I've kind of learned from the tape is the Exotic to Monkey Moon combo, especially offensively, is very real still. Like, they have carried that over, and trying to find a way to incorporate Zen in a positive manner might take a little bit of time. He is the highest goal participation player of any player. At least I think. I was looking at all the sheets individually. So VK Salen is really high, for example. He's at 65%, and Zen's at like 69%, which is just unbelievable. Like, you typically don't see a player who is that high on a team that is putting it together in a good way. But I just think what we are doing is looking at Vitality and comparing them against. We're thinking this team have to be the absolute best in the world, and if they are not, then they're failures. And like, they are still clearly, in my eyes, the second best team from Europe, which is the strongest region in the world. And I have them as the second strongest team coming in here. Um, I can hear arguments about why they shouldn't be there, and I'll listen. But maybe it's just me being stubborn. But I think I'm right on this one. I think that they still have a very real shot of winning this whole thing. I think they have the second best odds out of anybody. The only team that's higher than them is Carmine Core, who, what can we say that has not already been said about the strongest team in the world? They just hum offensively. Drali making a legitimate claim for being the best player in the world, and for a duo in Vatira and Atau to be able to add the best player in the world, a team that was already excellent last season, outside of course, them really getting run off the rails and struggling to get back on in missing one of the main events when they had Rise last season. Outside of that, still an awesome team. The question for them is, can you guess what word I'm going to say? That's right, it's pressure. Atau and Vatira have both been on teams in their own respective rights and also together that feel like they are one of the strongest teams in the world coming into lands, and then they end up kind of falling apart. So they know they're the front runners. We all know they're the front runners. How is that going to impact them? Is it going to derail them and get them in their own heads and have them fall apart in kind of that like top 6 range, top 4 range, or are we going to see them come out here and claim the trophy that is rightfully theirs? They again have looked like the best team in the world, and it hasn't been very close in my opinion outside of that GK matchup. Dominated Dignitas, dominated Vitality, dominated Ninjas in Pajamas, and also the rest of the field. Again, really the GK matchup is the only blemish on their roster here. So that's how I have them. What do you guys think? Let me know. I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we'll talk about players to watch from each team here.